December 1943. The skies over Germany have become a graveyard. High above the frozen landscape, a lone American B-17 bomber is fighting to stay in the air. It is a shattered wreck. The nose is gone. The rudder is shredded. The engines are smoking. Inside, the floor is slick with ice and blood. 10 men are on board, wounded, freezing, and terrified. They are miles behind enemy lines and they are sitting ducks. Suddenly, a shadow falls over them. The pilot, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, looks out his left window. His heart stops. 3 feet away, close enough to see the rivets on the metal skin, is a German Messerschmitt fighter. The enemy pilot is staring right at him. Charlie closes his eyes. He grips the yoke. He waits for the muzzle flash that will turn his plane into a fireball. He waits to die. But the guns never fire. Instead, the German pilot does something that defies the laws of war. Something that would remain a secret for nearly 50 years. He nods. He salutes. And he guides them home. Before we unravel this incredible mystery, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We dig deep into the archives to bring you the forgotten stories of history, the moments of humanity hidden inside the horror. Join us so you never miss a story. Now, let's go back to December 20th, 1943. They called the B-17 the Flying Fortress. But on this cold December morning for Charlie Brown and his crew, it was nothing more than a flying coffin. To understand the miracle, you first have to understand the disaster. The plane was named Olde Pub. It was part of the 379th Bomb Group stationed at RAF Kimbolton in England. On the morning of December 20th, the crew was woken up before dawn. The target was Bremen, Germany, an industrial heartland heavily defended by the Luftwaffe. Charlie Brown was a 21-year-old farm boy from West Virginia. This was his first mission as an aircraft commander. He had a crew of young men depending on him, and they were flying straight into the teeth of the enemy. The mission went wrong almost immediately. As they approached Bremen, they hit the jet stream, pushing them out of formation. In aerial warfare, formation is life. A bomber alone is a bomber dead. Then came the flak. The German anti-aircraft guns on the ground put up a wall of exploding steel. A shell shattered the plexiglass nose of the bomber. The wind roared into the cockpit at 60 degrees below zero. Another shell took out the number 2 engine. Then the number 4 engine began to fail. But the flak was just the opening act. Suddenly, the sky was filled with German fighters. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s swarmed the crippled bomber like sharks smelling blood. They attacked from the front, shredding the cockpit. They attacked from the rear, destroying the tail gunner's position and killing Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode instantly. The damage was catastrophic. The hydraulic system was gone. The electrical system was dead. The oxygen lines were severed, meaning the crew was slowly suffocating while trying to fight off frostbite. The plane was vibrating so violently that Charlie Brown had to wrestle the controls just to keep the wings level. By the time the fighters broke off, Olde Pub was a skeleton. It had huge gaping holes in the fuselage. The surviving crew members were huddled together, wounded, trying to inject morphine into each other with freezing hands. Charlie Brown looked at his instruments. He was alone. He was losing altitude. And he was deep inside Germany. He began to limp the plane towards the North Sea, knowing they probably wouldn't make it. And that is when the Predator appeared. In Nazi Germany, there was a strict penalty for a fighter pilot who shot down an enemy bomber. That penalty was death by firing squad. On the ground at an airfield near Bremen, a German ace was refueling his plane. His name was Franz Stigler. He was not a rookie. He was a veteran of the skies, having flown combat missions in North Africa and Europe. He was just 1 kill away from earning the Knight's Cross, the highest military honor in Germany. Franz stood by his fighter, smoking a cigarette, when he heard a strange sound. It was the low, grinding rumble of a dying engine. He looked up and saw the B-17 passing low overhead. It was smoking, flying slow. To a fighter pilot, this was a gift. It was an easy victory. Franz tossed his cigarette, jumped into the cockpit of his Bf-109, and roared down the runway. He was airborne in less than a minute. The sheer power of his fighter allowed him to catch up to the limping bomber effortlessly. He approached from the rear. He checked his guns. He lined up his sights on the fuselage of the American plane. His finger tightened on the trigger. All he had to do was squeeze and the B-17 would disintegrate. He would have his medal. He would be a hero of the Reich. But as he closed the distance, Franz hesitated. Through his gun sight he didn't just see a target. He saw the damage. The tail was half gone. The rear gunner's position was a mangled wreck. He could see through the massive holes in the plane's skin. He could see the crew inside, frantic, tending to their wounded. Franz took his finger off the trigger. He remembered something from his past. Years earlier in North Africa, Franz had served under a commanding officer named Gustav Rodel. Rodel was a man of honor. He had told Franz and the other young pilots, "You are fighter pilots first, last, always. But if I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." Franz stared at the B-17. It wasn't fighting back. The guns were silent. The men inside were helpless. To Franz Stigler, that bomber was no longer a weapon of war. It was a parachute made of metal. Shooting them now wouldn't be combat. Would be murder. Charlie Brown looked out the window and saw the black cross of the Luftwaffe. He didn't know that the man in that cockpit was about to risk his life to save them. Inside the bomber, Charlie Brown was trying to stabilize the plane when his co-pilot screamed. Charlie looked left. The German fighter was right there. Flying formation. Wingtip to wingtip. Charlie's heart hammered against his ribs. He yelled for his top turret gunner to get ready, but the guns were jammed or frozen. They were defenseless. Charlie waited for the German to peel off and attack. But the German didn't attack. Instead, Franz Stigler looked Charlie in the eye. He waved his hand. Franz was trying to signal them. He pointed down towards the ground. He was mouthing the words, "Land. Land here." He knew the Americans were badly wounded. If they landed in Germany, they would be captured, yes, but they would receive medical treatment. They would survive. Charlie Brown shook his head. "No," he thought. "I'm not landing." Franz tried again. He pointed north. He was trying to tell them to turn towards Sweden. Sweden was a neutral country. It was a short flight away. If they made it there, they would be safe for the rest of the war. But Charlie Brown was confused, terrified, and suffering from shock. He didn't understand. He just kept flying west towards England, straight into the deadliest wall of anti-aircraft guns on the French coast. Franz Stigler realized the American pilot wasn't going to turn. He had a choice to make. He could fly away and let the German ground gunners finish them off. Or he could do something insane. Franz decided to stay. He maneuvered his fighter plane so that he was flying extremely close to the bomber's left side, the side facing the German anti-aircraft batteries on the ground. The German gunners on the ground looked up. They saw the American bomber, but they also saw a Messerschmitt 109 flying in formation with it. They held their fire. They assumed the German pilot had captured the bomber and was escorting it down. Franz Stigler was acting as a human shield. For miles they flew together. Enemies, brothers, survivors. When they finally reached the open water of the North Sea, the danger from the ground was over. Franz looked at Charlie one last time. He raised his gloved hand to his forehead in a sharp salute. Then he banked his plane away and disappeared into the clouds. They both survived the day. But when they landed, they were given an order that would haunt them for 40 years. Forget everything. Charlie Brown managed to wrestle Ye Olde Pub back to England. The landing was a miracle in itself. When the ground crew inspected the plane, they were stunned. It had over a dozen major structural failures. It should have fallen out of the sky. At the debriefing, Charlie Brown stood before his commanding officers. He was exhausted, shaking, but he told them the truth. He told them about the German pilot. He told them about the mercy. He told them about the salute. He expected them to be amazed. Instead, the room went cold. The Allied High Command made a decision immediately. They told Charlie, "You are to never repeat this story. Not to the press. Not to your crew. Not to anyone." The logic was cold and military. If word got out that a German pilot had shown mercy, it might humanize the enemy. It might make other American pilots hesitate to pull the trigger. The war needed killers, not philosophers. So Charlie Brown buried the story. He went on to fly more missions. He survived the war, went to college, rejoined the Air Force, and served in the State Department. He raised a family in Miami. But he never forgot. His daughter would later say that Charlie suffered from terrible nightmares. He would wake up sweating, seeing the flak, the blood, and the face of the German pilot. Franz Stigler faced an even heavier silence. He landed back in Germany and told no one. If he had admitted to shooting down a B-17, he would have been court-martialed and executed for treason. He kept the secret through the final bloody days of the war, through the collapse of Germany, and through the hard years of Reconstruction. In 1953, Franz immigrated to Canada. He became a successful businessman. He tried to leave the war behind. But he too was haunted. He wondered every day, did they make it? Did I save them, or did they crash into the freezing ocean 5 minutes later? Two men, separated by an ocean, connected by a secret that neither could speak. For 43 years, Charlie Brown asked himself one question: who was he? In 1986, he finally decided to find the answer. It started in 1986, at a gathering of combat pilots called Gathering of Eagles. Charlie Brown was now an old man, a retired colonel. During an interview, someone asked him about his most memorable mission. For the first time in 4 decades, Charlie broke his silence. He told the story of the German who didn't shoot. The room was mesmerized. People began to ask him, who was that pilot? Charlie realized he had to know. He began a desperate search. He wrote to the U.S. Air Force Archives. Nothing. He wrote to the West German Air Force. Nothing. The records from that specific day in 1943 had been destroyed, lost in the chaos of the Nazi defeat. It seemed like a dead end. For years passed. Charlie was getting older. He was losing hope. Then, in 1989, he tried a different approach. He wrote a letter to a newsletter called Jägerblatt, a publication for German fighter pilot veterans. In the letter, Charlie described the date, December 20, 1943. He described the location. He described the damage to his plane. And he included the one detail that only the other pilot would know: the salute. He mailed the letter and waited. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, Canada, Franz Stigler was living a quiet life. He was 75 years old now. One afternoon, he picked up his copy of the Jägerblatt newsletter. He opened the page. He began to read. His hands started to shake. The date matched. The location matched. The description of the shattered tail and the terrified crew matched. After 46 years of wondering, Franz Stigler finally knew. They made it. The men he spared had lived. Franz sat down and wrote a letter to the address in Florida. A few days later, Charlie Brown opened his mailbox. He found a letter from Canada. He opened it and read the first line. 4 simple words that changed his life. I was the one. They met as enemies in the sky. They would die as brothers on the ground. Charlie Brown called the number in the letter. When Franz Stigler answered, the two men spoke for hours. Franz described the markings on Charlie's plane that he could only have seen from 3 feet away. Charlie wept. The nightmares that had plagued him for half a century began to fade. The monster in his dreams was not a monster at all. He was a man named Franz. 6 months later, they arranged to meet in person in Seattle, Washington. There is footage of this meeting. It is one of the most powerful moments recorded in military history. Franz Stigler steps out of a car. Charlie Brown is waiting for him. These two old warriors who once tried to kill each other's nations ran towards each other. They threw their arms around each other and sobbed. Franz pulled back, looked at Charlie with tears in his eyes and said, "I love you, Charlie." That meeting was the beginning of a second life for both of them. For the next 18 years, they were inseparable. They became the best of friends. They traveled across North America together. They went fishing. They spoke at air shows. Charlie introduced Franz to the surviving members of his crew. He introduced Franz to his children and grandchildren. Franz Stigler, the man who had been called a Nazi, the man who had lost his own brother in the war, looked at the families of the men he saved. He realized that by saving that one plane he had saved generations. In a book he later gave to Charlie, Franz wrote an inscription. In 1940, I lost my only brother as a night fighter. Thanks, Charlie. Your brother, Franz. The end of their story is as poetic as the beginning. In 2008, the health of both men began to fail. On March 22, 2008, Franz Stigler passed away in Vancouver. He was 92 years old. Charlie Brown was heartbroken. It was as if he couldn't bear to be in a world without his friend. Just 8 months later, in November 2008, Charlie Brown passed away in Miami. They are buried thousands of miles apart. But their legacy is inseparable. Their story became a bestseller called A Higher Call. It is a book that is studied by military officers and historians around the world. But it isn't really a story about war. It isn't about tactics or airplanes or politics. It is a story about the human conscience. It teaches us that even when the world tells you to hate, even when the law tells you to kill, you still have a choice. You can still listen to that quiet voice inside you that says, "We are all human." Franz Stigler risked his life to save an enemy. Charlie Brown spent a lifetime searching to say thank you. And in the end, they proved that the bonds of brotherhood are stronger than the borders of any nation. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of the forgotten past. We'll see you in the next video.